classe mangiare, o proletari alla riscossa, mangiare rossa trionferà. Bandiera rossa deve trionfare, bandiera rossa deve trionfare, bandiera rossa deve trionfare, e viva il comunismo e la libertà, avanti il popolo alla riscossa, bandiera rossa, bandiera rossa.
Tonight's meeting of Workers' International Network. It's great to see so many of you here. We've got a bit of noise interfering here. If you don't need to say anything, please could you mute yourself, or maybe Dave mute everyone except myself and John Ryman and Rob Wallace. I think that's probably all that needs to be unmuted at the moment. Okay, thank you, Dave. So I think the acoustics are better anyway where I am at the moment. It's great to see so many people here. We're meeting at a time where all over the world, almost every day, there are new reports of workers' uprisings and the beginning of new protest movements. And the backdrop to all of that is a huge health crisis facing the globe. And I'm going to ask John Ryman to say a few words of introduction to bring everyone up to date with the reason why we feel very privileged to have Rob Wallace speaking to the meeting. So over to you, John.
Okay. Well, comrades, I'm speaking from here in California. We're right at the moment, we're experiencing a perfect trifecta of the clash between capitalist production and the laws of nature. We have an extreme heat wave. Smoke throughout the state is filling the air from the unprecedented forest fires. Meanwhile, they're having to evacuate tens of thousands of people due to these fires, but where are they going to evacuate them to? Because social distancing is necessary due to COVID-19. And make no mistake, this pandemic is part of the clash between capitalism and the natural world, as Rob Wallace will explain. Therefore, as socialists, it is absolutely essential that we have an understanding of the actual science involved and that we explain this understanding to the rest of our class. And it's an honor to introduce Rob Wallace, to whom we owe a special debt of gratitude. We've all experienced job losses, ostracism, blacklisting, and more in the struggle for an understanding of society and for a better world. And Rob is one of those who has made those same sacrifices. As he writes in this book, Big Farms Make Big Flu, he says, while once I had a promising career as an evolutionary biologist studying influenza, he wrote this before COVID-19, consulting for the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, I now find myself professionally ostracized, indeed on the precipice of earning the moniker of an enemy of the state. The blacklisting stems from the decisions I have made about the nature of science. And he explains Big Food has entered a strategic alliance with influenza. As I said, that was before COVID-19. Agribusiness, backed by state power at home and abroad, is now working as much with influenza as against it. Rob presently works with the agroecology and the rural research corporations. He's the author of Big Farms Make Big Flu, which, if you haven't read it, I urge you to do so. And he co-authored a forthcoming book, Clear Cutting Disease Control, Capital-Led Deforestation, Public Health Austerity, and Vector-Borne Infection. And with that, on behalf of the Workers' International Network, we welcome Rob Wallace, and I'm sure we're all very much looking forward to what he has to say. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, John and Ed and everybody there. You guys are always in the future now, of course. You're 6-7 hours ahead of me, so I'm wondering how things are going over there in the future. So, sorry, lame joke, but it's wonderful to be here. And I think what I'll do is I'll speak for about 20-25 minutes, and then we can open up for a conversation. I think what I'll do is I'll start off with a kind of a review about where we are. And, you know, clearly, obviously, we are in the middle of a pandemic, COVID-19. It's caused by a virus called SARS-2, which implies that there was a SARS-1. And yes, 2002, SARS-1 emerged out in Guangdong, which is the southeastern province in China. And it went on to infect 8,000 people, killing about 10%. And we were very lucky that we were able to, you know, when I say we, I'm speaking about the humanity. We're able to maneuver it into basically burning out, in part because the infection is not, it's not infectious until you start showing symptoms. So as soon as anybody with SARS-1 starts showing symptoms, we were able to isolate them and cut off the chain of transmission. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that with SARS-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. It's well, there's a lot of reasons we'll get into, but one of the things we're up against is that it's infectious even before anyone shows symptoms. So, you know, any of us walking around would seem in perfect health. Even those of us who may be infected but don't even develop symptoms are in fact proving to be the major source of new infections from person to person. So, you know, I began my career as John says, an evolutionary biologist. I still consider myself an evolutionary biologist, but I was looking at genetic sequences of avian influenza. If you remember, at the turn of the century, H5N1, that was the first celebrity virus of the new batch. We were all concerned about. We were concerned in part. We were all in some ways freaked out over the fact that H5N1 emerged, spilled over directly from poultry right into humans. At that time, we didn't know that that could be a possibility. We thought that most influenzas had to be channeled through hog before hitting humans. I was looking at genetic sequences for H5N1, and from there you can basically make family trees based on how closely related the genetic sequences are. And then because you know where the samples, the isolates were sampled, where the genetic sequence were taken from in terms of their location, you can in essence infer how the virus moved from place to place just from the genetic sequences. Now, I made the mistake of becoming curious about something, and in science, that's not always the best career move. So I wanted to know, why did H5N1 emerge in Guangdong in 1997, and you know, what was going on? So I got into things like the history of agriculture in the region, the political economy of agribusiness, and you know, broadening out to, because at some point the things in the genetic sequence can't speak to particular questions. Now it proved to be, H5N1 proved to be the first of many new pathogens that seem to be emerging almost on an annual basis here. So H5N1, we had H9N2, we had H7N9, more influenzas. If you remember 2009, we did have a pandemic, H1N1 2009, that emerged off hog farms outside Mexico City before spreading around the world. At the time, we were very fearful that would be another big one like 1918. It proved to be less virulent, less deadly as we were worried about, but it did kill 500,000 people that first year. So it was something that's maybe a footnote that many people don't remember, that you know, you get an infection out onto the global travel network, and you're in a position to be able to infect a large portion of the human race in a way that in centuries past wasn't quite the case. There have been, of course, pandemics past, but we're at a place where our global travel network is so integrated that a virus that emerges out of outside Mexico City, or in a deepest forest in Africa, or within a cave in China, can go from that cave and circulate about and, you know, get on a plane and be on the other side of the world in no time. So it's not merely a matter of how deadly any one of these viruses are, you know, whether it's 10% death rate or 5% or 1%. If you have, like SARS-2, COVID-19 virus, case fatality rate of 1%. If you can get out on the global travel network and infect most of the world, you infect, you know, 4 billion people at 1%. That's many millions of people who were killed, even by a virus that isn't ostensibly that deadly. You know, so you fill out that list. I was giving a list of influenzas. There's SARS-1, there's the MERS, the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome virus that is in the same family as SARS-1. There was Q fever in the Netherlands. There was Ebola, Makona in West Africa, as you know. There was Zika, and you know, typically what happens is any one of these pathogens emerges, we kind of race to our computer and look it up. You know, its virology, its clinical course, its epidemiology, its potential origins, and we get all sucked down into those details, as we should, because indeed it is an emergency. We're worried about it. But unfortunately, what happens is that the focus on the emergency aspect of it kind of distracts us from discussing some of the more structural causes for why these viruses emerge. And it happens to be with COVID-19, well, there's one horrible irony about it, is that our team and others weren't focused on another SARS, even though SARS were circulating since 2002. Many teams have been sampling SARS across central and southern China, but across all the world, in fact, in bats, which are the typical reservoir for some of these diseases. So, you know, but our focus was on African swine fever, which had over several decades emerged out of Africa, hit the hog industries in Europe, more recently into Eastern Europe and into China, where from 2018 to 2019, it killed half of China's hog. China's the largest hog producer in the world, and given how closely related the hog immune system is to the human immune system, many of us had our eye on the African swine fever. So what I'm getting at here is, I did speak of it, we have these pathogens emerging almost on an annual basis at this point, but in actuality, they are emerging almost in parallel. So you can have your eye on the ball for one of them and miss out another one that came in out from underneath your expectation or understanding. And so there is an aspect of a kind of random nature to how these pathogens are emerging, but it doesn't mean that it's all chaotic and completely randomized. There is, as I was getting at, despite when you have a series of emergencies one after the other, then you start to get a picture that there's something profoundly has changed in the nature of how pathogens are being selected for and are emerging in a way that they hadn't and weren't emerging at this pace, nor in this kind of diversity. And so some of these pathogens are, have been around for a while, but suddenly they have an opportunity that they didn't have before. And historically speaking, that's been the case. If you go back to the beginning of civilizations, when we became more sessile, in the early days in Mesopotamia and in Africa, we became more into organizing ourselves into towns. Acute infections like influenza and diphtheria suddenly had a population of humans that could host such an acute infection and still be able to circulate about. So with our growing livestock and our increasing concentration, influenzas and diphtherias and other pathogens like that suddenly had a hold in the human population didn't have before. And basically across human history, as we've changed our mode of social reproduction, we've provided barriers to infections that previously infected us, and we've also opened up opportunities for new infections. I think the one that immediately comes to mind is HIV. Some of the phylogeography, that's the science that I was just describing. You know, you look genetic sequences, and from there you can reconstruct how these viruses moved around. Well, they're able to figure out that the HIV-1, that's the major HIV that went pandemic, originated from simian immunodeficiency viruses, SIVs, that were circulating in chimpanzee groups in southeastern Cameroon. And they were able to date it to 1908, give or take 20 years. And about that time, it's when colonization arrived in Cameroon, at least the European version of it. And you have the French and Germans basically fighting over how to best engage in the extractivism of the area. SIVs may have been spilling over into human indigenous groups for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But now you have a change in the landscape in such a way that the deepest forests are now suddenly connected to the coasts as colonial enterprises engage in the extractivism of rubber and palm oil and logging and forcing indigenous groups into hard labor. You change the sex biases of these groups, and you churn things, everything from sex to bushmeat into a commodity. And in such a way, you increase the interface between the SIVs and the human populations, and you allow a chain of transmission that wasn't the case before, as the indigenous groups are typically isolated in the deeper parts of what is now Cameroon and the Congo. So in other words, historically speaking, this has been going on for some time. So what COVID-19 did for our group is that we finally put some pieces together and were able to develop a kind of a model of our way of thinking about it that is able to encapsulate all the different types of pathogens that have emerged this century. And our notion is that it's primarily organized around circuits of capital are driving the development and deforestation that's leading to the increase of interface between wild reservoirs for many of these pathogens and spilling over into humans. And the way we look at it is in terms of a circuit of production. In a very abstract way, we begin with those pathogens that spill over at the contact of deforestation. So Ebola typically is hosted by bats that are frugivores or insectivores. And we see in 2013 the emergence of Ebola Macona that, genetically speaking, in terms of its biology, really not that different from Ebolas that were spilling as far back as the 1970s. Typically, up until that point, Ebola would hit a village or two or kill a chimp or gorilla troop. Terrible thing. You kill 90% of the villagers, but then it would burn out on its own. Now we have in 2013, Ebola Macona arise and infect 35,000 people, killing 11,000 living bodies in the streets of regional capitals and threatening to go pandemic. And for a virulent pathogen like that, that was indeed quite a scare. So what happened? I mean, if the virus didn't change, what did happen? And our group looked into it, and we put out a book with the title called Neoliberal Ebola. It's our notion that the political economy of the area changed in such a way that, in essence, allowed the Ebola in West Africa to spill over into humans and make its way into the local regional capital. So Liberia at the time had been colonized since as far back as 1925, Firestone rubber, all that. Guinea nearby, and only in the last 20 years, it started to engage in that kind of export economy. First, they produced these parastatal companies dedicated toward kind of nationalizing palm production and basically taking it away out of smallholder hands to try to get up to some sort of economy of scale that would attract international capital. So it was that point in its classic marks in the sense of, primitive accumulation, all the things you want to go back to England at the beginning of modern capitalism. It's starting off in Guinea rather late, but you will recognize all the attributes of land grabbing and enclosure and proletarianization, or at least a semi-proletarianization, where farmers there would work for the company part-time and then make their way to the city to gain a little bit more money before they came back and help with the family plot. So you have that cycle migration going on from the deepest forest to the regional capital. And as far as the bats themselves, as you have more plantation palm oil develop, most species are lost upon deforestation, but some species do quite well. And the bats, they don't just roll over and die. They look at the plantations and start to roost there. And what's not to like? No predators, no competitors. You have a nice space to go from your roosting site to your foraging site. And then, of course, you have an increasing interface with the human, the labor on the plantation. And then because labor's migrating back and forth between the rural areas and the urban areas, you have a straight shot from deepest forest all the way to the regional capitals. So that's at the end of the, in terms of the interface directly at the point of deforestation. Other pathogens are emerging on the other end of that kind of circuit of production. So a lot of the avian and swine influenzas are emerging more along the industrial hog and poultry operations, would typically straddle the urban areas. And as big agriculture expands around the world, you see we're being increasingly encircled by cities of hog and poultry. Not just China, not just the US, but increasingly in countries around the world. So that end of it, we have closer to the city. And then you have pathogens that emerge along the circuit. And Zika comes to mind. Came out of Africa, hopscotched across East Asia, the Pacific area, and then into Brazil. Primarily an urban disease, but it doesn't mean its dynamics are divorced from what's going on in Brazil. Brazil, China, India, they're all engaged in the BRICS road of capitalist production. They want to get a big FU to EU and the US. We're going to do capitalism our way. We're going to pull our people out of poverty that way. And of course, leaving millions behind in poverty as well. But in the course of developing their own forests in that way, that is their version of increasing the interface between reservoirs of disease and humans. The rural areas are not, you don't really have this easy urban-rural divide anymore. You have these kind of peri-urban continuums in which rural areas start taking the characteristics of urban areas. You have rural areas act as kind of food hubs for agribusiness export. And so you're really disconnecting all these previous ecologies that in essence act as a buffer to keep pathogens from emerging. And you're smoothing out those complexities in a way that allows pathogens had difficulty lining up hosts to be able to transmit host to host. Now you've simplified the forest, and some of those pathogens that are able to survive have a much straighter shot through that peri-urban a continuum to the city. As far as Zika goes, it engages in what's called reciprocal activation with other pathogens, things like dengue and yellow fever. When someone's infected both by Zika and these other pathogens, the pathogens help each other out in terms of their biochemical pathways, and you can have an infection that becomes that much worse. So even an urban pathogen, its dynamics are dependent on how forests are being developed as well. Now, so here in our mind, we begin to organize all these different types of pathogen within the circuit production. What about COVID-19, SARS-2? Well, there are different ideas of its origin, but in terms of this framework here, we have SARS being collected and cataloged since 2002 when SARS-1 emerged. and discovered all sorts of different types of SARS-like pathogens in bats across southern and central China, spilling over multiple times into all sorts of different animals. You have the kind of wild food sector, you know, all in the wet markets, various animals are being sold, not just your traditional poultry and livestock. You have all sorts of civets and snakes and such that are also being sold as food. It's not a huge part of the food sector, but it is increasingly becoming industrialized in a way that makes that easy dichotomy go away. You know, the notion of, oh, industrial food here, wild foods over here. Well, some of the same money bags are beginning to support both those types of kinds of food, industrializing more wild foods in a way that they hadn't been previously. And both sectors are competing for land, cutting into the forests in such a way that they can grow their livestock in the last of the virgin farmland, as it were. And so we have this pressing pressure on central and southern Chinese forests, cutting up against where SARS was circulating among bats. Point of reference, points of information. Bats are thought to be able to harbor many of the most virulent pathogens like Ebola, like SARS, in part because they're the only mammal that flies, so there's a real premium on having an immune system that works really well, which puts pressure on the pathogens that do infect that immune system to keep up and really replicate at high speeds in such a way that should it spill over into animals that don't have that kind of immune system, it's going to do considerable damage. So SARS-2 was really just one of many SARS-like pathogens that are circulating in the area. And although there was a lot of focus on the Wuhan live market, considerable more analysis, both of genetics and the ecology, indicate that in all likelihood, SARS-2 was circulating for as far back as 40 years. And that it may have been circulating in humans for a long time before it finalized the last mutation necessary to go really fast human to human. So in other words, there's another like Zika. It is circulating along that circuit of production from deep forest to the peri-urban areas to the rural area to the urban areas. It's splattering across its traditional livestock, including hog in Guangdong in 2018, in the wild foods that we were talking, in humans directly. So, you know, it's almost a matter of chance. If you keep rolling the dice, that at some point one of these SARS figures out that how to do this. Now, what that speaks of is that we may be still in quite grave danger. If you have 3 major SARS emerged since 2002, it really speaks to the pace that SARS is on in terms of experimenting with the human immune system. It doesn't look pretty. If we think we're in a bad situation now, of course, I am always a harbinger of really good news, I'm sorry. But if you have SARS emerging at this pace, it's unlikely that we won't be waiting from 1918 to 2018, as it were. We won't be waiting another 100 years for a really nasty one to emerge. As terrible as this one is, in some sense, we are lucky. It's only as a case fatality rate of 1%. But the important point is, and you know, to speak to the kind of the introduction, and then I'll wrap up here for now, and then we can open up for discussion. But you know, the point is that it's really such a focus on the emergency aspect of it. I mean, every time one of these pathogens comes up, the kind of the political class and the scientific class that works for them focuses on emergency, as they should, but often at the expense of ever dealing with the structural aspects that led to the emergence of not just this SARS-2, but all the pathogens in the last decade. It's like we're all supposed to forget everything that happened to get us to a point that we've arrived in which industrial agriculture is selecting for multiple pathogens that are virulent, very infectious, cutting into the forest, letting an increased diversity of pathogens spill over. And it has fundamentally to do with the nature of agriculture these days. It's become more, what was previously a more natural economy where farmers, they grew things. They were all agroecologists until about 100 years ago when they started to apply taylorizing the agriculture and making it more of an industrial economy. The thing is, though, that in the course of industrializing our livestock and our crops, we also industrialize the pathogens that circulate among them. So we end up selecting for strains that are more virulent and more infectious, and by virtue of the global travel network, able to go from one end of the world to the other in a matter of weeks, in such a way that, and particularly at a time and place where austerity reigns, public health budgets have been cut to the bone. Clearly, England and the US were similar in our neoliberal metaphysics of assuming, just gutting public health as a notion of a public commons, and also monetizing it, though you're quite not where we are. Even under Obamacare, we're at 28 million people without health insurance, 24 million underinsured. Public health is basically struck down to your, your personal relationship with your doctor. So in effect, while we ramped up the power of pathogens to damage us at the global scale, we've reduced our capacity to control outbreaks, both within the agriculture sector and also as a matter of public health. So that's what I'm going to say for now. So I'm be happy to hear what you have to say, or if you have any questions.
Right. Thank you very much, Rob. Really excellent introduction to this topic, which has put science at the center of our understanding of this virus, but also connects it to all the social and political issues that are very much the substance that WIN works with, Workers International Network works with every day of the week. So it's a really good connection, Robert, an excellent introduction. I'd like to give everyone in the meeting now an opportunity to make a comment or ask some questions, so that we can all begin to get some discussion on this very important topic. Who would like to start? I don't see any hands up, but I take it everyone knows how to raise their hand electronically. You go to participants and there's a facility for raising your hand. If you're finding it really difficult, you can raise your hand on the screen, but for me, there are two screens and I might not see you straight away, so you're better off doing it electronically. All right, I'm going to take Peter Sinclair first of all. Dave, can you unmute Peter? Or Peter, can you unmute yourself?
Okay.
Gotcha.
Thanks, Ed. Yes, I would like to ask Rob, why are children apparently exempt from COVID-19? How can it jump from human to human, but appear to choose older people to affect?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Sorry, thanks, Rob. Why are children apparently exempt from getting COVID-19? How can a virus jump from human to human, but appear to be able to choose older people other than juveniles? Is it possible that our natural immune system has been previously damaged by vaccinations? Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm not a fan of the notion of vaccines causing the damage at all. As far as it goes, I'm actually hoping that there's a vaccine that's developed. I don't like how we're arriving at that moment. Here in the US, the NIH version of it is on a fast track to try to get Trump reelected and to basically get people to take it, even though it's not through a phase 3 testing yet. So in order for it to maintain the trust of the population, you need to make sure that the vaccines are developed well and tested in such a way. And historically speaking, vaccines have basically, other than bad reaction now and then, for the most part, mortality rates for some of these outbreaks that we were basically ravaged England and elsewhere for hundreds of years, or have been basically removed off the board by virtue of vaccines. You know, I think the focus on vaccines is another way of avoiding taking responsibility for how these pathogens emerge in the first place. And I think a lot of our scientists today are, in essence, you know, they're the guy at the circus who cleans up after the elephant, right? All the turds there. You need somebody to do that. But it takes away from the notion of, well, how is the elephant able to move about in the first place? Meaning, how are these pathogens emerging from in the first place? Gets away from capital-led deforestation development driving the outbreaks. So we can do one and the same thing. The left has a proud history of fighting against capitalist incursions into nature, destroying our wealth and both our labor and our natural resources. And it has a proud history of fighting for the rights of working people to get the latest in medical medicine and medical technology. So both those things go hand in glove. As far as children go, they do get infected. They just are not at this point damaged, though we do have increasing reports of it being the case. It has to do in part with kind of the molecular biology of it all. Long story short, as we get older, we tend to have more of the receptor that's more the doorway in which the virus enters our cells. That also explains in part the difference between the worst cases in men and women. Men tend to have more of these this receptor than women do. So there are biomolecular and clinical explanations for why there's a difference between various demographics in terms of getting sickened. But you know, as far as, oh, well, if children aren't getting sick, we send them to school. Well, what happens to the teachers who are teaching them? Are we just going to send them in to be infected and killed by this? What happens to the parents when the kids come back home? This is already in spades here in the United States. Georgia, state here, really gave a FU to the notion of public health, brought the children into school. It was a real ideological battle to make that happen. And of course, they closed down in a matter of weeks because you had high infection rates. The universities here are kind of neoliberal universities are running a scam, basically. They're having the students come in for the fall semester. Then the students get together, they get sick or infected. They pass it on to people who work there, the professors, their parents. And then the university says, see, these kids aren't doing what's right in terms of maintaining social distance, and therefore we're going to an online program. Meanwhile, we're going to keep their tuition and their money that they pay for the dorm. But the universities are in desperate straits that, you know, once they're neoliberalized, they are not getting support from the state. They're down to running these kinds of scams as far as making sure money still comes in. So I would say that, you know, there is good reason for distrusting governments in terms of how this is going down. The state has a class character. It is operating in favor of making sure that the system of profit continues on forward without disruption. That's why they send people, workers back into the meatpacking plants. That's why you know, they're providing very little support for health workers in terms of PPE and all this. Better to reduce the outlays to stop the outbreak, but keep the machine going and have the worst outcomes in terms of death and disease upon working people. So there is reason to push back against the government. And there is reason to distrust some of their scientific conclusions and their medical advice. Everything from, on your end, Bojo's notion of herd immunity. Although we're so far behind here in the United States, we've only finally now arrived at herd immunity as a rationale for doing nothing. You know, the notion of just letting the virus burn through the population and producing enough immunity to keep us from being infected, which is at best only a passing thing. But at the same time, you know, we should also be clear that there is a scientific basis for some of the things that we would want. And as you know, for historically speaking, working people, science has been hand in glove with capitalism in terms of producing the kind of imperial state that we see right from the beginning of the age of exploration or colonialism. When the Portuguese first arrived on those islands off Africa, they were confronted by people and plants they didn't understand. So they needed scientists to decode them and to recode them into commodified objects and sources of labor. So science has a terrible track record. On the other hand, working people have been involved in scientific enterprises for hundreds of years and engaged in understanding and reading up on science and understanding that there's a material basis to our conditions, our living expenses, all those things. And we have a proud history of you know, reading up on science and keeping up abreast of all the major developments. And so I would advise that we avoid the kind of more conspiratorial stuff. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. I don't mind that at all. But there is a material basis by which we can make decisions about what is best for working people in a way that the state is increasingly abandoning.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Now, Rob, you're providing some really brilliant insights that kind of link the politics with the science. There's 2 hands up, and there may be more. In WIN, we very much try and promote discussion, and there's 3 hands up now. I'm going to ask a number of speakers to come in a row, and if you'd be good enough to listen to the discussion, and at some point I'll call you back to respond to all of the discussion. Okay, so we'll see how it goes, Rob. Okay.
No problem. I talk too much, so
no, you don't talk too much. It's great to hear you talk, but we're going to give other people a chance as well. So the next speaker in the discussion is Cheryl Zur. Cheryl, where are you?
Yeah. Hi, I'm right here.
Good.
Yeah. Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for your work and for your courage. It's not a perspective that, as you know, is really present anywhere. And the average person who is living in fear of this pandemic really doesn't know the things that you're talking about. So while it's a necessary perspective, it's also sort of overwhelming to figure out where do we go from here in terms of fighting to change the practices that have brought about this crisis that we're in. One of many. I mean, it's sort of obvious to me, and I'm assuming everybody else in this meeting, that, you know, the solution is the end of capitalism as we know it, and for working people to control the means of production and have a true democracy. However, barring that happening tomorrow, what can we do? I mean, the uprisings that have been going on in the United States against racism and police brutality, other places in the world, the focus is very, very limited. It's not a broad movement as we know it. It's not even an anti-capitalist movement at this time. So I would just be very interested to hear your perspective on that, how we as socialists can bring this critical information and perspective to the social movements that are developing, and what you know about where people are discussing this and fighting for it to change the sort of practices that have led to this pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. I'm going to ask now Richard Spedding, please. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I have done.
Good man.
Can you hear me, Ed?
Yep.
Good. This is not a well-formed question, really, but it's a part of a discussion in my own head. We're currently you know, when I was born, there were 2 billion odd people in this world, and there's now 7 point whatever there are, 7.7 billion. We need to feed them. While I don't necessarily agree with capitalism the way and I obviously don't agree with capitalism the way it has gone, and I don't agree with monoculture the way it's gone, how can we, going forward, provide a balanced ecology and still feed all the people? Secondly, one of my wife's pet beefs really is that the virus, all the viruses, have a vested interest, much the same as we humans do, in replicating themselves. It's not in their interests to have 10% mortality rates. They're quite happy with 1% or 0.5% because they will carry on replicating and not killing their hosts. And they will keep on mutating until they get to a balance. How do we see that evolving? Because obviously, I take the point with global travel and everything else that diseases get all around the world in next to no time. Are we then advancing a theory that we shouldn't travel all the way around the world, that we should be going back to where we were 500 years ago? Or because with the advent of things like Zoom that we're on now, we can talk to people, we can actually make informed decisions at a distance, whereas perhaps we weren't able to previously, and it was necessary to go and be there. And we can talk about tourism and whatever else, but that's just a way of capitalism making money from people. That's just 3 strands that are totally unformed, but the question is, how do we see things going forward and maintaining anywhere near the number of people on this planet and the standard of living that they do have? Now, I accept that we are in the top 2-3% of the world, the people on this call. So, and I accept that there are many, many billions of people that don't have the standard of living that we do, but they aspire to them. How are we going to make them understand that they can't have our standard of living, or how are we going to make people like us understand that we're going to have to accept a reduction in our standard of living?
Okay. Thank you, Richard. A very interesting question. Next, going to take John Ryman.
Okay, so a couple of points. I just wanted to comment on what Richard had said, and I'm sure Rob can answer it better than I can. But as far as the mortality rate, as far as I understand, it doesn't really matter if it's got a 1% or a 98% mortality rate, as long as it gets transmitted from one host to another before it kills the host. That's the whole point, the speed with which it's transmitted. Also, I was going to say on the issue of feeding the population, and I was going to ask Rob also, if I haven't seen him comment very much on the whole issue of regenerative farming, which is an alternative, as I see it, to the factory farming. But I think there's not time in this meeting to really discuss it, although I think Workers International Network should have a discussion on the alternatives to factory farming. The main point, Rob had commented that the scientists in his field focus on the emergency, which is in effect the details, that focus causes us to get distracted from why these viruses emerge in the first place. And I have to say that for many, many socialists, we tend to do the same thing and tend to focus and as Rob said, scientists have to focus on the emergency. And we as socialists have to focus on how can we defend workers' rights and the rights of ordinary people and our interests in the face of this emergency. But we must not let that distract us from understanding the nature of this emergency. And I think that's the importance of what Rob has presented and what we really have to do better as far as presenting to the working class. Finally, I wanted to ask Rob, Rob, you recently published an article on some of the more recent research as far as the origins of this particular virus. And as I understand it, some serious scientists think that they produced evidence that it may have emerged in a laboratory, not as a conspiracy or anything, but by mistake escaped. And you have presented the evidence that it did not. And in fact, that it may have emerged through some form of, in part, through some form of factory farming. To tell you the truth, I understood about 2% of what you wrote because you wrote it as a scientist. And I wonder if you could go through some of that, explain it in layman's terms for us.
Okay, thank you very much, John. If Rob can bear with this flow of questions and discussion, I'll give you plenty of time when we get a chance, Rob. I'm going to get there's somebody put their hand up called David's Phone, and I'm not sure if that's the same as Dave Buxton. But would David's Phone please speak? Oh, okay. Is that you, Dave Buxton?
Oh, no, it's not me, but I can't raise my hand electronically.
Yep. Don't worry. I've got a note that you want to speak. So David's Phone, please speak. David's iPhone.
I must apologize. I thought I had full identity. I apologize if I'm just, lurking away as a David, yet another David of my generation. Look, thanks for a fantastic presentation, Rob. And could I say that, our tributes are the least of it. I'm hearing on the BBC, that's the British Broadcasting Corporation, not some other corporation, reporting of the work, well, it mentioned in passing the work that you've done, but bringing up many of the scientific points that you've made are now beginning to appear in statements there, particularly in relation to the development of swine flu epidemic in Malaysia and how it spread from there. And again, and I see the United Nations is even making statements of a similar kind. So those are tributes, maybe sometimes not fully attributed, but they are, certainly tributes to the work that you've done. My questions, or some of the things I'd like to explore is, as follows. When John introduced you, he mentioned that, capitalism is in conflict with the laws of nature. And in a way, the laws of nature are now showing themselves to be dominant in many different ways. I mean, as you've mentioned, the emergency we face is a health emergency. And so the virus, in a sense, is the most immediate natural threat that faces humanity. But then there are other natural threats as well, which include some of the following, such as the accelerated development of global climate change, deforestation, which interweaves, deforestation and the development of factory farming. I mean, the two are tightly interwoven, and I think you've given graphic examples of what's happened in West Africa. The biodiversity and the extinction of species. And then, of course, the pandemic, the crisis in public health, and the associated but not completely explained crisis of the capitalist system itself, an economic crisis. Now, I'm not wanting to throw up a whole lot of ideas and just see how they fall, but I'm trying to weave together, it's an implicit question, really. How do we weave these different natural phenomena, together? Because in a sense, the virus is the short-term threat to humanity, Global climate change is a longer threat. I mean, John mentioned the fires happening in California. We've had fires in Australia, and we've got, it seems, permanent fires now taking place, you know, in the Arctic zone. And this is, you know, extremely, extreme danger, to all of us. And why it's, you know, of concern is I was listening to an interview with Lovelace, who is the author of the development of the idea of ear, that is the interaction of natural phenomena together and the way in which Earth systems respond to change. And, you know, he's now 101 years old, and he feels that, you know, he has about a 1%, you know, chance of survival into the next few years. And he feels the same about the Earth, maybe a few more years than that, but that we've also got a 1% chance of actually adapting and intervening in a positive way to be able to get command, you know, of the ways in which capitalism, what he talks about, our economic and our modern system, are devastating, you know, the natural world, and whether it's possible to retrieve, you know, what has been lost. One of the points I'd like to just ask you, or to raise with you, is it seems that deforestation is right at the center of all the processes which are taking place. The breaking of the barriers between the natural world and urban society, and the way in which viruses are being transmitted, as zoonotic viruses are being able to be transmitted. And what I heard recently, and I've not read much about this, but maybe, you know, you could explore this. It seems that during the processes of deforestation, you know, some species are eliminated, other species thrive, much as though you see, you know, weeds suddenly emerging where there's been land plowed. And it seems as though, you know, some of the most malignant and the most deadly of viruses are accelerated by these processes. I think you mentioned the fact that one virus could help each other. I mean, it's incredible if we can think, you know, of a virus, something which is invisible, and just a natural little the minute active particle or series of particles actually interacting and having a plan. But in a sense, you know, every organism, you know, has a plan for survival, or it doesn't make it. And, you know, that seems to be, in other words, you've mentioned a number of viruses sort of competing with each other to gain prominence. And it seems as though the process of deforestation is breaking down the natural world in such a way that some species, which could be some kind of barrier, you know, are being removed. And that's accelerating, you know, those which are providing the greatest danger. So I want to, just one last point. You know, often we talk of science as it operates as inherently, you know, a good thing, to coin a phrase. But actually, you know, having been in a scientific institution in South Africa, you know, the pressures on a director who's a research director who's employing people and having to pay salaries and the rest, the pressure to be able to get money from whatever source is absolutely, you know, devastating. You just have to get contracts, you know, to be able to survive, to be able to keep your research teams together. And I imagine, you know all about this. But it does mean that there are distortions in science, because science then chases the money rather than money chasing, you know, the real breakthroughs in science. And I think that this doesn't make the scientific conclusions of scientists, you know, invalid, but it does mean that, you know, people who are working in the scientific field are often grubbing away in something which isn't really the critical thing. And as you mentioned, we deal with surface phenomena, such as emergencies as they present themselves, which we have to do, but maybe we don't understand there's distorted science, such as the CDC sort of coming out mealy-mouthed in trying to say one thing, but actually meaning the other. There's imprecision. There's the lack of focus on what the key issues are. And then there's the obscurity. You know, sometimes when you read what should be critical science, which is really examining, you know, what's really gone wrong, you have to read a paper over and over again to be able to understand that they're really covering up a phenomenon. They're trying to tell the truth, but they know that if they absolutely tell the truth, as I think it was in Mobil Oil or one of the great oil, I think it was engine oil, you know, they had scientists who were doing research into global climate change, but they weren't really allowed to publish, and their work was suppressed. And so, you know, we find that, you know, there are all these distortions with science. So it's not really a clean palette. It's not as though we get it, you know, straight from the scientists themselves, but it usually goes through some distorted processes before we, you know, we get it. And that means that it's not always able to be taken up quite as, you know, by the public, as in public health, immediately as it should have. You could even take the question of the use of masks was originally not encouraged. Well, it wasn't said to be essential, but now we see that I think it's the Reserve Bank, or it's the Federal Reserve Bank, now saying that masks would be the biggest boost to the economy that America could see. In other words, it's changed tremendously in the last couple of weeks. The science probably was the same throughout, but what was said about science was something quite different. Let me stop there. But thank you again for your marvelous contribution. There'll be continuing debates around this work. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, David. I just want to make this point to the meeting. At least a quarter of the people on the meeting are female. So far, there's only been one woman come forward in the discussion. If there are any females wishing to be involved in the discussion, please get your hand up, because there's quite a long list of speakers. I'm going to have positive discrimination for women if anyone wants to speak. And fairly soon, I'm going to be calling on Rob, and I'm sure Rob will justifiably have a lot to say. So there's not a lot of time left to get your hand up. The next person I'm going to call in, unless any female has suddenly put her hand up, which I don't see, is Finn Barr. You're still muted, Finn. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Firstly, I want to thank Rob for an excellent contribution. And I'm asking this question as a fellow scientist. There's huge competition between the big international capitalist drug companies. Who's going to get there first? Not just with the vaccine, but other things also being worked upon, cures, treatments, and so on. Now, the work on these substances that are being developed is carried out by chemists, biochemists, microbiologists, PhDs, lab technicians, all working together in the laboratories of private companies. That's their job, that's what they're paid for. But when the cure or the treatment or the vaccine is developed, all the profits and all the benefits from that work goes to a board and shareholders, none of which may be scientists. Perhaps none of them understand the first thing about science. So the work of invention and creativity is in the hands of people working in laboratories in these big companies. So the question is, this shouldn't be left to private companies. Now, at the moment, there's competition between America, United Kingdom, and probably Russia to see who's going to get there first. But when the first achievements are there to be seen, that's a tribute to the microbiologists, the chemists, the biochemists working in labs, but the benefit goes to the company. Now, we need to look for public ownership of that entire industry, and there's probably a public mood for that, to demand public ownership of the drugs companies. I'd like to hear your opinion on that. And secondly, this issue of the trade union movement. The people who work in labs, now I can only speak for Ireland, would be members of public service trade unions. all the way down from, across the full gamut of the work to be represented by trade unions. Now, is that the case, for example, in America and in other countries? Because if that is, if there is a strong trade union presence, then the trade unions should be demanding also public ownership of these drug companies, because it's a disaster situation that we're suffering a huge global pandemic, and the big decisions about what's going to be done is not being made by workers, be they skilled workers or whatever. It's been made by boards of companies who have no knowledge possibly whatsoever about science, and whose only interest is in making profit for the company. So they might just as well be making anything else. So science is a class question. The scientist is the worker in the lab. The company has nothing to do with science, regardless of the title they give themselves as a company. So I'd like to hear some of Rob's comments on these issues.
Okay, thank you, Finn. I'm going to call Dave Buxton next, please.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, very much for your introduction to this subject, which I found fascinating. It reminded me somewhat of a meeting I attended about 20 years ago. It was a European Social Forum meeting in Alexandra Palace, which is in North London. And a scientist turned journalist, George Monbiot, spoke to a huge hall of people with about 600 people there about climate change, saying that basically the way the climate was changing cut across all other issues. So if you were fighting for wages or whatever, that wasn't really the fight. The fight was to tackle climate change, or else we won't have a planet left to fight on any other issues. Now, I didn't agree with that approach, and I realized it's because he was using a moralistic approach rather than a scientific approach. And I think that's what Rob has done, in contrast to George Monbiot 20 years ago. He's given us the tools in which we can go and argue with people that, yeah, the reason why we've got COVID-19 is because of the reasons that Rob has explained to us, and to take the issue on in a scientific way, but also politically about the way that capitalism has developed. Now, the challenge is, what sort of society are we going to have? And if we advocate a different sort of non-growth type of approach, then we're going to be called by the neoliberal economists, we're going to be called neo-Luddites. We want to turn everything back to when we had candles instead of electricity, and horses instead of cars and aeroplanes. Well, if that's what it takes eventually, because with climate change, it's the same problem that the economic system is causing climate change, as well as all of this deforestation and changing the whole way the planet is organized, as Rob explained, then we have to come up with an alternative. But I think the alternative really is that workers need to take more control. I listened to a podcast of a meeting very recently about Lucas Aerospace alternative plan for the 1970s. And I remember it then, because I bought the book, and basically it was a group of British engineers who were mainly involved in arms production, who said, look, we need to save our jobs, we need to change our industry to the long term and do away with arms production over time with socially useful products instead of arms. And they came up with a whole list of range of things, which included, in the 1970s, wind turbines, electric motors for cars, vehicles that could be converted to work on rail, as well as kidney machines, all sorts of socially useful things that would make money, but it wasn't driven by profit. And basically, they got nowhere because the powers that be, the capitalists who dominate our society, said, no, we're not doing that. We're just going to continue. And that unfortunately included the Labour government at the time, which is another story. But in that example, shows that we can organise society differently. These engineers came together, they came up with a plan of alternative production, and it had the sort of things that they wanted to bring into production are the very same things that now our society is desperate for. So can you imagine that if we put the mind of workers, gathered everyone together to come up with a democratic plan for what we need to tackle both these pandemics, more investment in health, and also climate change, what sort of society we would have. And I think that's the challenge, using scientific arguments that Rob gave us, but also at the same time, being bold and challenging capitalism. I think I'm hoping that Rob would agree that that's what we need as an approach.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. I'm glad you mentioned Lucas Aerospace Workers. I actually moved a resolution about their struggle at the 1978 Labour Party conference. The next speaker is Anna Clara. Can you unmute yourself, please, Anna Clara?
Hello, thank you for inviting us. I am Tina, so you probably won't understand me that well. I wanted to ask two questions. The first one is regarding the situation in Argentina. We are about to sign an agreement with China to bring these really big farms for the production of swine meat. I'm sorry, I don't have the technical jargon all. And my question was, would bringing all of these farms from China to Argentina, which is less developed industrially and technologically, could this increase the chances of another pandemic, perhaps from African swine fever, which is a very big problem and the reason why China wants to bring the farms over to us? The second question would be regarding the two origins of zoonosis that Rob mentioned. And one of those was factory farming. And what caught my attention was that there are many reports regarding outbreaks in China, but not so much in countries as North America or in Europe, where there are also factories of this kind. So I wanted to know if there is a miscommunication, if it is not that much reported, or if there is disparity in the outbreaks regarding the industrialization and being more developed and such. Well, thank you very much, and I hope it was understood.
Thank you, Anna Clara. Your contribution was very well understood. You speak in good English. Thank you for talking to us. The next speaker in the discussion is Jim Hollinshead.
Hi, comrades. Thanks, Rob, for the introduction and the contribution. It's been really interesting. I'm a university lecturer. I teach at a university in the UK, and I've been doing that for about 20 years. And the conclusion that I've come to over recent months is that the senior management of universities want to kill me and want to kill lots of people, because it's very difficult to escape that conclusion when you see the determined refusal on the part of the senior management of universities to actually recognize the seriousness of the threat that universities pose in a pandemic situation. We're going to be returning to face-to-face teaching in buildings in a couple of weeks, towards the end of this month. basically what's going to be happening in the university that I teach in is that we'll be taking people from the worst affected parts of the UK, who are the most gregarious and least disciplined in some ways, shall we say. I'm not saying that as an attempt to pass the blame onto students, but they are young people, many of them away from home for the first time and reacting to it in the time-honoured manner. I'm bringing them together into what was, until a couple of weeks ago, one of the worst affected cities in the worst affected region within the UK, without an effective track and trace system, without any serious control of the way people are going to operate and integrate, and in buildings which were largely, most of them built, well, most of them relatively recently built, but built as a lot of university buildings are these days, more like insurance company headquarters than places of learning, or much older, where the ventilation is appalling, the corridors are narrow, rooms are small, and so on. And I think that's going to be a particular problem. I think universities could well be the source of a second wave of infection in the UK, if we haven't already embarked on that, as we've seen. I don't know whether you've noticed, but we've seen cases start to mount up. So then it was quite interesting hearing your remarks on that early on, and I think that's something that we need to be aware of and watching out for. I've got a number of different points that I want to make, largely because of being late, put my hand up to come in, which is always the way in these kind of meetings. I want to talk about this issue of food production and feeding everybody, whilst at the same time taking steps back from intensive agriculture of factory farming. And in a lot of respects, it harkens back to the Green Revolution of the 1960s and the 1970s, and this idea of intensifying and industrializing and introducing science. It's interesting that this discussion actually in a lot of ways has become a discussion about science rather than necessarily a discussion about the pandemic and so on. I think that's really interesting. I think we need to make that conscious in a discussion we're having in the future perhaps. But that Green Revolution, which was presented as a means of feeding the multitudes, of moving away from food insecurity and precarity, and it was dressed up as being particularly in the third world, was actually a massive retrograde step in almost every respect. Not necessarily in the sense of the way science was applied, but in the way that it wound up being realized and the impact of that Green Revolution. Because make no mistake, that Green Revolution and farm intensification, factory farming, large-scale monoculture is not about feeding people. We were already producing enough food to feed everybody in the world in the 1960s and 70s. We are producing now more than enough food to feed everybody in the world. The problem is with producing food on the basis of profit, so it's not going to where people need it, it's going to where it achieves the best profit. The issue is not food production, it's food distribution. So looked at in that respect, moving away from intensified, massive factory farms and so on is a lot easier than you would think in reality. Samir Amin, who's unfortunately died not so long ago, and people, if people aren't aware of Samir Amin, they should look him up and read some of this stuff. Was proposing that the solution to hunger, the solution to food insecurity, is not intensification and industrialization of agriculture, but actually in a lot of respects a return to subsistence farming, a return to small scale, more local farming, particularly in the developing world, in Africa, Southeast Asia and so on, because I think one of the things people need to realize as well is one of the purposes of factory farming and massively intensive agriculture isn't feeding people, it's getting them off the land. It's not about providing food to people, it's providing large numbers of people that don't have to provide their own food. It's about driving them away from the land into the cities to provide a pool of labor in the developing world that can be exploited cheaply. So what Amin was arguing, and I tend to agree with that, is that the more people that can be kept on the land, the better. What needs to happen though is support for that, support from that in terms of science, in terms of investment, in terms of money, in a planned way, which is about developing people's lives rather than developing profit. And that's really where a lot of the issues around food security lie. And I've noticed in the chat there's a number of discussions around waste and the small-scale agriculture being more wasteful than large-scale agriculture, because waste in a small-scale operation is a bigger proportion of the whole. But actually, small-scale agriculture is not wasteful. Small-scale agriculture wastes virtually nothing because resources are too valuable. You want to see someone who's frugal with their resources, that makes everything count. You look at a subsistence farmer. Or go down the road and look at someone who works in a allotment. You don't have to travel, excuse me, to the other side of the world to see that. People with limited resources husband them. Another point that was made earlier on was a passing one about what are the driving forces behind getting viruses out into the world from intensive agriculture. And John hit on a point, which I think, John Ryman, which I think was interesting, making the point of virus doesn't care whether it's deadly or whether it's not deadly. What the virus wants to do is disperse, like any other organism. It wants to reproduce and it wants to disperse. It wants to get its progeny out and find a new host. So it doesn't, from the virus's point of view, it doesn't matter whether it's very deadly or whether it's not. But that's where intensive agriculture comes in, because what intensive agriculture does is shorten the lifespans of animals massively. A few months is all that it takes in an intensive factory farm to produce a pig, or a few weeks for a chicken that's going to be slaughtered. And what is absolutely imperative for the virus is that it gets out of that animal before it gets slaughtered, because once it's slaughtered, it's not going to be able to do that anymore. So viruses have to be in the evolutionary pressure on viruses in factory farms is to be as infectious as possible. Not to be deadly necessarily, but quite often, I think I was late coming into the discussion, but I think you made a point about the difference between SARS and COVID-19. That COVID-19 is infectious when it's asymptomatic, and I think that's really the point that I'm trying to get at there. That what a virus wants to do is be as infectious as possible, as quickly as possible, and get out of its host. And that's where the real pressure of factory farming comes in. And if you're unlucky enough to have one that is also then really virulent and deadly, then you've got a real problem. We've actually been lucky with COVID-19. It's got a relatively low infection rate and a relatively low case fatality rate. If it hadn't, then we might be in a much more problematic position. Want to wind up with a question to Rob, which is entirely speculative. I'm sorry, and it's, we seem to be looking at the way new zoonotic infections have appeared over the last few years, last couple of decades, it seems to be at a very rapidly increasing rate. And that's really worrying to me. I think probably worrying to everybody. But do we think that, or do you get the impression that that's tied more to the prevalence, because the factory farming has been being exported from the developed world to the developing world as well throughout that same period. There's been a massive boom in factory farming. Do we think what we're seeing there is entirely down to the increase in intensive factory farming of animals? Or do we think that it's also tied to climate change, particularly producing more favorable general conditions? Anyway, I'm making that one up on the spur, really.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to, because there's loads for Rob to come back on. I'm going to give Rob some time, but I just want to ask. About 20 minutes ago, there was a name up, SR Cuba, on the list of people who wanted to speak. Is SR Cuba still in the meeting? Doesn't appear to be. Okay. Well, thank you. Sorry, somebody. Okay. No, nobody's claiming to be SR Cuba. Okay. So, Rob, there's a lot there for you to come back on, and I thank you for your patience, because it has been a very, very interesting set of questions and discussion, and I'm sure, I mean, there is, you know, up to 25 minutes if you want to take that amount of time, Rob, to come back on all the points that have been made. So I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Ed, quickly, Trish says that she can see SR Cuba on the second page.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just will you just hold on for a mo? Well, if SR Cuba wants
Hello.
to
Yes, my name is Simon Rodriguez. Thanking John for the invitation. Yet Ana Clara from Argentina, she expressed the questions I wanted to ask. Therefore, I didn't take my time. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much for clarifying that. And yes, and thanks for Ana Clara for doing the questions for you. Okay, so yeah, we're going back to Rob. Rob, it's over to you.
Okay. Well, you know, those are amazing questions. I mean, there's everything there, right? So, I mean, I think sometimes we arrive at a moment where it's the question that we dare to ask that's the most important step forward. If we, even those of us who are radicalized, often accept the premises of our enemy. And that's in some ways how we get by in life and from day to day. But we arrive at a moment where we understand that those who are running things are a bunch of sociopaths. And so you must come to an understanding and accept and to reject the terms of the problem that is presented to us and the solutions that are presented to us. Cheryl's question, what to do, of course, is the key one. She went first, but I think I'm going to hold off a little bit and get to some of the other things to kind of set up to trying to answer her question. But I think the first thing is to get off our knees. I mean, stop accepting the notion that these people who run things know what the hell they're doing. They're making it up as they go along. And our presumption is that those who rule understand some aspect of what the reality of things are, and often they do not. So, you know, the notion of letting a neoliberal insult you as a neo-Luddite, when in fact the Luddites have a proud history. They were destroying technology, not because they opposed technology, but it has to do with the fact that that technology was embedded in a particular mode of social reproduction that was the beginning of sending, rolling over everything in both land and labor into the hands of a few. So, part of what we need to do in terms of building up answers to what to do next is to understand that, historically speaking, there have been people who've been asking these questions and fighting the good fight from the very beginning. And what we need to do is to resurrect them in some way. What the present political class does, it says, oh, there's only one strain of history that led to this moment. It was inevitable. If you follow from one decision to the other, this is where we are, this is how it happened, and there's no going around it. But in fact, all along the way, all of the decisions were in play in terms of people rejecting them or wanting something else. And our job is to resurrect those histories as a way of serving as a rationale for why a different future forward is necessary and important. So in some ways, they've done things to us to accept their terms, in terms of saying that using even our political ancestors as an insult, and we've accepted that. I've gotten to the point that even within the last year, I think the story of Prometheus has got it all wrong. I mean, it's hard to say Prometheus, forethought, and his brother was supposed to be the stupid one, Epimetheus, afterthought. I mean, who wants to be the person who only thinks about things afterwards? But there's much to be said about that, of thinking what the hell happened with this outbreak, how it came about, and to come to some better ideas about how to move forward. I mean, we don't have to get rid of our forethought, but the stories that these cultural artifacts and premises that have been built into much of the system is routinely incorrect and often spun in a way to force our hand to presume that common sense involves accepting the premises of the bourgeoisie. And I think we have to stop doing that. And even in this conversation today, all the questions here speak to that many of us have the matters at hand. We understand the nature of the problem. That we dare to ask those questions is a declaration that we have arrived at a historical moment that something else must be done. So let me address in the specifics some of your questions. I think in terms of Richard's questions about how to feed lots of people, I think Jim, among others, I think addressed that very well. I won't go into the details. Suffice to say, there's plenty of food. And it is about industrialization, isn't about producing food. I mean, in fact, it's about bleeding out nutrition. So you're not getting much when they deliver it. So, and it's about land grabbing, and it is about an ideology along the lines of how we began here, of basically making people engage in a kind of traumatic bonding. That happens with scientists, that happens with farmers. Some farmers and scientists do accept the premises of their oppression. Others know exactly what's going on, but they have bills to pay. So many a farmer, they may have consolidated with neighbors. They may be raking in $100 US a year, but they're poor as hell because almost the entirety of their revenue goes to paying for inputs that nature typically were provided if it was taken care of. I mean, you have pesticides when you could have birds and bats and diversify crops and livestock. You have fertilizers for soil that can be enriched in ways in a perfectly natural way, and along the lines of the kind of regenerative agriculture that was brought up. So there are all sorts of means by which to return agriculture to a natural economy in which we are able to fold in the ecosystem services necessary that nature provides just about for free, and which agribusiness, often pesticide and chemical companies in addition, have stripped away and forced farmers to pay for. In some ways, I'm already answering Cheryl's question. So there's very hard-headed, practical things to be done. I think the one that always grabs my attention is the fact that industrial livestock and poultry aren't allowed to breed on site. What does that do in terms of the pathogens that are circulating? So, you know, you see pictures of H5N1 blowing through these barns, killing every bird standing, except you might see a couple chickens still standing. It might be just by luck, but it might be some quirk in their immunogenetics that allows them to survive this particular strain. Well, we should use those birds, if they survive, to be the progenitors of the next generation, right? We now are going to use natural selection as a service on our farm to help us. But in fact, that's not what happens in industrial farms. There is no breeding on site. All the breeding is done at the grandparent level for morphometric characteristics like bigger breasts, fast growth, and all the protection in terms of disease are about vaccines and antibiotics. Oftentimes, vaccines aren't able to be developed in time enough during an outbreak. H5N2 outbreak here in the United States killed 50 million birds, mostly by the virus itself, but also by culling. They didn't come up with a vaccine until H5N2 had already blown them out of town. So, you know, I look at industrial production, and it's exactly, you want to select for a pathogen along the lines of what Jim was saying. You want to select for a pathogen. The best way to select the most dangerous pathogen is along the lines of industrial production now. You don't reproduce on site. You slam in 15,000 turkeys in one barn. They're pretty much genetically the same, so you don't have the immunological fire breaks necessary to disrupt an outbreak. You are, as was getting at the questions of evolution of virulence that Richard was getting at. In fact, it was long thought that virulence declines over time, but that's not necessarily the case. If you have susceptibles packed in like that, it selects for the strains that burn through there the fastest. And if you are one barn over and you have 15,000 turkeys again, this happens at the barn level, at the farm level, at the regional level. It selects for strains that can be as virulent as possible. So in some sense, to answer Jim's question, I would say, yes, it's the export of the model around the world that's leading to this on two accounts. One, it drives the deforestation, leading to the increase of the interface between reservoirs of disease, animals like bats and such. And two, once the pathogens get in there, those pathogens that might have been less virulent are selected for, their virulence and deadliness are selected for. So, and of course there is, along with that, the climate change. Yes, you have a kind of a secular trend going on where it's vastly shifting things in a way that leads a fast reduction in the capacity for ecosystems to buffer, changes in the landscape, whether there be outbreaks or flooding or any of those things. And all those things can lead to the emergence of specific pathogens. As far as, does this have to involve us going back to a time that no longer exists? I mean, I think, the bigger picture as to what to do is to get at that it's not just about the pathogens, and that this outbreak is a warning shot across our bow about a multitude of woes that are on our way. We are on the precipice of multiple environmental catastrophes, all sorts of things going on, from the circulation in water to decline in drinking water to the pollution to the destruction of our soils to the changing in climate and so on and so forth. And there's a long history of explaining this. Marx began John Bellamy Foster's work on the Metabolic Rift. He describes how from early on, Marx detailed the means by which capitalism basically alienates both land and labor, disconnects ecological processes that took hundreds, if not thousands of years to integrate. And so you have waste that would be, as Jim said, on smaller operations recycled one way or the other, or in fact in larger operations externalized out. I mean, the whole point of a industrial farm or in any industrial production is to externalize the costs onto everybody else. and to privatize the profits. So whether that's the worker in the meatpacking plant, whether that's the farmer in their landscape, all of it turned into sacrifice zones, whether it's consumer being fed food that doesn't have nutrition, whether it's the pathogens that emerge out of these operations spread around the world. They get to, many of the companies will blame the Chinese, many of the companies will blame the pathogens themselves, and many of the companies will blame smallholders for not engaging in the biosecurity that they had nothing to do with in terms of the emergence of the pathogen in the first place. So get to Anna Clara's question, it isn't just China. H5N2 is circulated here in the United States. H1N1 2009 emerged outside in farms that were apparently subsidiaries of Smithfield hog operations. And this, we call that outbreak the Nafta Flu, in part because once the North American Free Trade Agreement was put in, then American meat dumped onto the domestic market to destroy the Mexican domestic companies. So domestic companies had two choices: either sell out to the new multinationals coming in, or to basically consolidate their neighbors and change their production into a more industrial model to be able to compete with the Smithfields of the world. And so it was about that time in which, post what was called the livestock revolution, post World War II, when poultry was suddenly moved from backyard operations into these these large companies that ran everything fully integrated, vertically integration from eggs all the way through processing. Well, that was adapted late by the hog industry in the early 1990s. And then it was only then that the diversity of swine flus that were circulating in American swine began to increase in terms of their diversity. Up until then, it was just our H1N1 from 1918 that spilled over into hog and was the primary influenza for decades. Once they went livestock revolution, once exports increased from one side of the world to the other, you have different types of influenzas are now able to exchange their genomic segments and be able to increase the diversity of the pathogens. That happened in the US. All sorts of strains of swine influenza emerged. Once NAFTA came in, those swine flus went to Mexico, and some of the phylogeographic work, gold standard stuff, shows that, in fact, H1N1 emerged specifically from states in Mexico that had more industrial production and was fed those genomic segments of influenza from operations in the United States and Eurasia. So, the US, the North American operation is what this pandemic came from. In Europe, EU, you had outbreaks of H5N1. So it isn't just China. It's, China's in a particular perfect storm of transferring itself from backyard to industrial at a scale that really selects for multiple strains, but that's certainly not the only thing going on. As far as Argentina goes, well, what is China doing, right? Well, we have to take a step back. Post-World War II, the United States basically took control of running the the global capitalist system, right? Our job was to, here in the US, was basically make sure that the global capitalism ran smoothly. So we put bases around the world to, put any rulers in check if they need to be. And that was basically to protect the bourgeoisie of companies or of countries around the world. CDC was part of that. Our prevention, our disease prevention, we had our objective here with CDC was to quash outbreaks around the world. So when, and outbreaks that emerged from capitalist production worldwide. So we were there, as I began this talk, we were the person behind the elephant to clean up the mess, right? That's why we sent people to West Africa, the CDC, to try to do something about the outbreak of Ebola Macona. What's fascinating about this after Trump is Trump never read any of the memos across Republican and Democratic administrations that our job was to run the capitalist global economy. And so it's really fascinating to see in a matter of months, the US reputation go completely down the tubes. And in some sense, it goes hand in glove with where we are in terms of our cycle of accumulation. Post-World War II, we were, or even before World War II, but certainly afterwards as well, we were on the upside of our cycle of accumulation, turning money into capital, which requires us building infrastructure, of imperial infrastructure and circuits of capital around the world. Now we're on the far side of our cycle of accumulation. We're turning capital back into money. That is, our bourgeoisie is cashing out. And that means selling everything off, including public health, including our fracking in our own country, polluting our own waterways. So our bourgeoisie is just trying to get the last bit of money as it can squeeze out of the American imperial infrastructure. China is doing something else. It's trying to, in essence, be on the front end of its cycle of accumulation, turning money into capital. So its business is basically engaged in kind of a more imperial design of basically offshoring its pollution in such a way that countries around the world now take on the worst of its operations. So, you know, that's why we had the WH group in China buy up Smithfield. That was a really an amazing, you know, a flag of a moment in 2013 saying what the you know, China was trying to externalize the cost of its production, and Argentina just falls in line with that way of doing things. The important thing is not to be xenophobic about it. It's not about China, as Trump puts it, right? It's about you know, these kind of world systems theories, notions that centers of capital shift over time. You start off with Italian city-states, Spain, the Netherlands, British, US, and now China. Doesn't mean it's going to work out, in part because we are on these ecological precipices, and the Earth may not cooperate with the notion that we can just cycle into a next phase of capitalism centered around Beijing. So, so my answer would be, as far as Argentina go, is that, yeah, you guys are being dumped on. There's no hog there, and you guys are going to be turned into the next, you know, pit by which hog are produced. I mean, China, they've got building like 13-story hog hotels where they have 1,000 hog per floor. I don't think they'll get that hog hotels in Argentina, but I mean, you can imagine the shit that's produced and the destruction of your landscape and the destruction of your domestic market. It isn't just about China. Your bourgeoisie in Argentina see an opportunity, and they're going to make bourgeoisie. See, the whole thing is about this Cold War between the U.S. and China. That's a pandemic theater. Both countries are trying to blame the other for the outbreak, but in reality, they worked together to help bring the outbreak. I mean, it wasn't on purpose, but in the course of China's, you know, foreign direct investment a lot of it came from the U.S. Goldman Sachs, the investment firm, like flat out bought, you know, farms in central China for $300 million. The world's bourgeoisie are basically an interlocking directorate. They work together, and they serve nationalism for the hoi polloi, for us to fight among ourselves and avoid the kind of internationalism necessary to defeat them. So, you know, if I was in Argentina, I would say, you know, hook up with working people around the world, hook up with your farmers down there. There's the difficulty, you know, with, you know, farming is that it's not clear, you know, there's a notion, you know, they're not so obviously proletariat in the sense of they're landowners. And so sometimes they identify in a kind of feudal way with owning land. But I think what working class organizers need to do is to skip through that, find your interface with farming communities, repair the metabolic rift as a political project. So you're not just repairing the rift in terms of where all the waste goes, but as a political project. Here in the US, the Democrats and Republicans have both made hay over splitting the country between urban and rural. So our project here is to get farmers and working people in the city to start to look toward each other as allies to work together, because everybody's getting screwed by the same people. I mean, agribusiness is not a rural project. It's a suburban project for the most part. headquarters are almost entirely in suburbia, and it's about sacrificing or turning rural areas into sacrifice zones, destroying the town economies that many of your farmers in Argentina depend on to basically bringing in inputs and circulate out their outputs and sell their material. There's their livestock and their crops, and what China coming in is not just about China. It's a signal to your farmers that the days in which they make decisions for themselves about what they grow and when are rapidly coming to an end, and they'll be turned basically back into the worst of peasant feudalism. And it doesn't matter if they have a huge farm and bringing in a lot of revenue. All that revenue is going to be cycled back out to the agribusiness companies. So you're on the precipice that you might be able to organize earlier in such a way to keep people from from that happening. Because once that happens, your landscaping and the people there are utterly destroyed. Here in Iowa, and I'm going to stop on that point in a second, but I do want to bring this one out. In Iowa, you have watersheds. Let's say 3 watersheds, one after another, and you might have 350,000 people across those 3 watersheds. But they're handling the untreated waste of hog and cattle of the equivalent of Tokyo, Mexico City, and New York City combined. So, I mean, it's just complete, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is really up in Iowa itself. And you don't want to turn yourself into Iowa, because then you can't swim in your local rivers. You can't eat your food because it's for processed ingredients. And so you are in a place where you might be able to get in on the bottom floor and start organizing people from the start, from urban areas right to the rural areas, as a way of stopping this, and would avoid the nationalism and the xenophobia, and do it on the strict notion that the people of Argentina have the right to make decisions about what happens in their country. Let's see what else. There's a lot going on. So to connect back to the notion that it isn't just pandemics, there's a large, long tradition, and I brought it up in part of the notion of the metabolic rift, that capitalism separates ecologies from each other and people from ecologies in such a way that you don't have the ecological cycling that goes on and the social cycling, and everything's alienated out to the point that the entirety of the system is dedicated toward generating profit in such a way that, in essence, capitalism in some ways exits off the surface of the planet. So Elon Musk, when he put that car into space, I mean, it's a dumb stunt, but in some ways it's really representative of what capitalism has always done, which is to basically exit Earth as we know it. And so what we need to do is engage in and this starts getting at Cheryl's question, engage into back into a practice of disalienation, of returning humanity back into Earth, reintegrating ourselves into the ecological landscape upon which we depend, and without we would die and in essence go extinct, and in such a way that we can continue to feed the billions of people on this planet, and reintroduce the kind of notions of ecological resilience to these kind of crises that are emerging not only in pandemics one after the other, but in fires and climate change and all that. Part of that involves recognizing that around the world there are indigenous groups who've been able to hold out, perhaps not in terms of the material command of their lands and such, but in terms of their ethos. So there is a matter of having to cycle out of what a lot of the left has grabbed onto, the notion of a kind of eco-modernism, that all we need to do is continue the path we're on, and we just need to change who controls the surplus value. That's the problem. I mean, and there's routine citing of Marx's a few paragraphs on machines, but in actuality, late Marx abandoned all that. In his critique of the Goethe program, he's very explicit that wealth emerges out of labor and land and labor and our ecologies together. And so those two things have to be integrated in a way such that there are resources available for us to appropriate. We do have a right to exist here. We're not here about going back to caveman times or anything like that. We do have a right to appropriate from nature to survive, but to expropriate to the point that we drive ourselves to extinction is just madness. And this gets back to my notion that the bourgeoisie who run on the global level and in our individual countries are basically engaged in a sociopathy that now needs to be abandoned. Now, as far as scientists and science and all that, my next book coming out next month on COVID-19 and other things, it's called Dead Epidemiologists. Dead Epidemiologists. And why is it called that? In part, it's not to take away from the brilliance and bravery a lot of these epidemiologists are involved in, even those who are they get all suited up to go into a cave to sample bats, and which must be a fun time for all. I'm sure the bats really like it. But the problem is, and on the cover there is such an epidemiologist about to enter a cave, and he's suited up like that. And there's something unnerving about it, because you're walking outside and you have to suit yourself up like you're on the surface of another planet, right? And this is the thing about the Elon Musk thing, the notion that somehow we're going to go to another planet. There's no way that's going to happen. Okay, it's not going to happen. And it's really remarkable that for the most part we're able to walk on the surface of this planet without a spacesuit on, and that we've evolved in such a way that we can just breathe in and have our needs met. It's real easy to grow food. I'm not to take away the hard work that farming is, but broadly speaking, nature enriches our soils, put some water in and seed, and it grows out, and things that we can eat and assimilate and survive. These are pleasures and wonders that we've taken for granted, to the point that we're really very willing and able to destroy it so somebody elsewhere can make a buck. And so that needing to basically come back to earth, as it were, reintegrating ourselves with the landscape, reintegrate ourselves with ethos that aren't necessarily our first instinct, including among we leftists. We have some adjustments to make. At the same time, there is a long, proud history of that. Even particularly in England, John Bellamy Foster's latest book on socialism and ecology gets into that. Talks about William Morris. He talks about E. Ray Lancaster. A long history integrating Darwin and Marx. That basically, in some ways, our discussion today is just a more acute crisis that was recognized, long 150 years ago at this point. This is what, I talked about how these scientists are, I call them dead, not because they're not alive, but there's an aspect of, and this is what Finn was getting at, the loss of, capacity to make decisions on your own as a scientist. And in essence, references to dead labor, right? That's what capital is. There's Marx's notion of dead peasants. And there's, the people walking around, and, what agribusiness and universities are very good at are inculcating their charges with their own expectations, the company's expectations. Materialism isn't just about what's in the soil or outbreaks or anything. It extends into the social and semantic. So agribusiness and universities are very good about training their farmers and their professors into thinking that they are members of the professional managerial class when they're as much as laborers as anybody else, you know. And you know, there's I don't know if it was Jack London or someone along the lines of, here in America, you know, everybody is just a temporarily disappointed millionaire. So, you know, it's ridiculous, the expectations that many a scientists, you know, as an identity, they assume the alienation and assimilate it in such a way that allows them to be bullied about and to, in essence, engaged in the practices of being filtered out. You know, the hiring stage in universities is about filtering people out. The grant process is filtering people out. And as the years go by, things get worse and worse. So you might have made pay grade and being hired, 20, 25 years ago, but that's not what they're looking for anymore in terms of loyalty to the company and to a particular ideological paradigm. And you know, clearly in the end, you know, all of a sudden they started calling the worst paid workers essential workers because they realized nothing was going to, society couldn't continue without them. You know, you reach a stage and there has to be a level of a change in consciousness to understand that, you know, of course, the capitalists are very good at, keeping people against each other. Divide and conquer is their aim, whether by race, whether by within countries, whether by cross countries and wars and such, whether it's within the factory itself or the place of work, you know, having full-time faculty against part-time faculty, you know, or having the you know, within the factory, you know, Mike Davis describes in his first chapter of his latest book about how in the factory, you know, different parts in the Taylorism was, you know, spun off to different ethnic nationalities. So, so there's, you know, all sorts of means by which working people are divided and conquered, or, you know, between proletariat and farmers. There's another one. So the objective has to be about, how do I make my way across these barriers that were forced on us? There are real differences, but there needs to be, we need to negotiate them to start to work together. Let's see.
Rob,
yes.
Forgive me for interrupting. We need to wind up fairly soon, so if you could bring your remarks to some sort of a very interestingly, but you know, try to get to an end point fairly soon. Thank you.
Okay, let's end here. I'll say something on the line of this is that you know, outbreaks aren't merely a matter about microbiology. They're not about viruses only. As we discussed today, in my yammering on and all your amazing questions, we begin to see that you know, something as so small as a virus that we can't see is foundationally related to the social modes of reproduction that we have in each of our countries and around the world. And everybody is affected in all sorts of ways by it. And this is only something of a preview of what climate change is going to do. I mean, if anything, this certainly signaled to us that the bourgeoisie is certainly capable and willing to basically throw people under the bus for their own safety and for their own profit. So we have no choice other than to start to work together and organize together and come up with many of the solutions that some of you were already bringing up. I mean, you know, start to look to each other and ourselves to come up with solutions. Start to, you know, get off our knees and decide that we are capable of making decisions about what to do next. you know, take honor and pride in the work you do, in the sense of that, you know, you have the capacity to, you know, make decisions about what's best, because in the course of doing your work, that's how the world is run. That's how things are accomplished. That's how we're able to continue as a civilization. So my hat's off here to everybody. I think you guys are all right on track. I mean, these are wonderful questions. And I think that is really the first step forward is, what questions do I want to start to ask, that we want to start to ask together? And I don't have to allow talking heads who are clearly paid to be, in essence, you know, provide a service to those who drove us into the ground. I don't really need to listen to them so much, and to start to listen to ourselves and each other. So that's what I have to say today.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. It's really been a first-class discussion, absolutely riveting, and as somebody pointed out in the chat, it's hard facts that we need like this to demonstrate the case for political change. I'll just make 2 points, and then I'm going to ask Roger to say a word or two about the WIN has a meeting normally once every week on a Sunday evening in the UK anyway. This meeting will be on WIN's website. It has been recorded. If there's anyone here who's been involved who wants their identity to not appear on the website, will you please let us know? You can let Dave Buxton know through the chat. You can let it, because he's doing the technical work to get this on the website. And already, I'll just say this by way of thanks again to Rob, and to illustrate what a tremendous meeting it's been. Already on the chat, there are comrades asking, suggesting that we ask you back to come and speak to us again sometime, Rob. So that's, you know, it really does demonstrate how valuable comrades have found this, your contribution particularly. So I'm going over to Roger Silverman now to say a few words about next week's meeting.
Okay, I just wanted to say, just very, very briefly, first of all, I see there are a number of new participants here. If you want to get onto our mailing list, I'm just putting up now my email address. Do just let me know and I'll get your name on the mailing list for future meetings. We do, as Ed said, we meet every week. There are meetings of political activists in a genuinely international, as you'd see. I think we've got probably close to a dozen nationalities here today. We've had, as tonight, we've had the most amazing meetings. We've had leading authorities, really world experts on a number of subjects, on the economy, on history, and like tonight, on the science. And we've also had at our meetings absolutely gripping first-hand eyewitness reports of people on the spot, so in some cases playing a leading role in the outbreaks and the uprisings that that Ed mentioned at the beginning from around the world, in the various hotspots in America, in Lebanon, in Belarus, and so on. Next week, we're going to have our comrade Rolf from Denmark, who's going to speak about the myth of the Scandinavian social democracy. I don't know whether he can promise us an uprising within the next week in Copenhagen, but in any case, I think it's very important that we do have the answer to, I mean, there's illusions and delusions around the world promoted, I know, apart from anywhere else in the USA, about the sort of golden magic solution in Scandinavia. Actually, the heritage of high social services and so on comes from huge and enormous class struggles you know, stretching back 100 years or more. And I mean, I think Rolf's lead off next week will be of great interest. So that's it. Hope to see you all. As I say, email me if you want to get onto our mailing list. Thank you.
Sono i confini, rosse bandiere,